I have watched people make the same retirement mistake for so long that it no longer surprises me, but it still disappoints me. They stare at the bigger Social Security check at 70, as if that number alone settles the whole matter. They look at the chart, they see the monthly benefit rising, they hear the conventional advice, wait, delay, maximize the check, be patient, take the larger amount later. And then they stop thinking. What they do not calculate is what they are forced to give up while they are waiting. They do not calculate how much they must pull out of their own accounts to bridge those years. They do not calculate the compounding they interrupt, the taxes they may trigger, the flexibility they surrender, the options they give away, or the simple truth that money is worth more when it arrives at the moment in life, when you can still use it with energy and freedom. That is where most retirement math goes wrong. When I have looked at capital all my life, I have tried to avoid a certain kind of mistake. People often focus on the visible return and ignore the invisible cost. They admire the surface number and miss the underlying economics. In retirement, the same error appears again. A person says, "If I wait, my check gets bigger." That is visible, but what is invisible is the money that must come from somewhere else while they wait. The tax character of that money, the lost years of compounding, the pressure placed on a portfolio, and the quality of life that may never return once the healthiest years are gone. So the real question is not whether the check at 70 is larger. Of course it is larger. The real question is whether delaying that check improves the whole system of your retirement, or whether it merely improves one line on paper while damaging the rest. That is the question sensible people should ask. Let me give you the simple framework I would use. If a man or woman reaches 62 with very little saved, this becomes a different discussion. If they plan to continue full-time work, this becomes a different discussion. If they have extraordinary longevity in the family, unusually strong health, and very specific survivor planning goals, this becomes a different discussion. But if they arrive in their early 60s with a meaningful sum in a Roth IRA, a traditional IRA, a 401k, or some combination of those accounts, then the decision stops being a slogan and starts becoming an allocation problem. And I have always liked allocation problems. Suppose you are 62 years old. Suppose you have $300,000 in retirement accounts. Suppose your Social Security benefit at 62 would be around $2,000 a month. Suppose your spending target is $4,000 a month. Most people are told to focus on the size of the Social Security check. I would focus first on the source of the other $2,000. If you delay Social Security and wait until 70, then for 8 years you need the full $4,000 every month to come from somewhere else. In many cases, that means your retirement accounts become the bridge. $4,000 a month for 8 years is $384,000 in withdrawals. That is more than the original $300,000 in this simple example. And that is before you consider the lost growth on the money. If instead you file at 62 and collect $2,000 a month from Social Security, then you only need another $2,000 a month from the portfolio over those same 8 years. That is $192,000 in withdrawals rather than $384,000. The visible story is that the age 70 benefit is larger. The economic story is that the portfolio may be forced to do far more damage. In the meantime, that difference matters. It matters a great deal. People make a terrible habit of analyzing retirement accounts as though the money inside them were static. It is not static. A Roth IRA continues to grow without annual tax drag, and under current rules, it is not forced into required minimum distributions during the owner's life. A traditional IRA and a 401 continue to grow tax deferred until required minimum distributions arrive. In either case, the capital you do not withdraw has a chance to keep working. The capital you pull out early stops working. That is not philosophy, that is arithmetic. I have spent a lifetime watching arithmetic win. If a portfolio earns 6 or 7% over time, the difference between withdrawing aggressively from 62 to 70 and withdrawing modestly over that same span can become much larger than people expect. They become hypnotized by the larger government check at 70 and fail to notice that they have been quietly liquidating their own compounding machine to earn the right to receive it. That is not always prudent. Sometimes it is expensive, and expensive choices are often disguised as safe choices. That is one of the central lessons here. People delay in the name of safety. They think they are being conservative, but there is nothing conservative about draining tax-advantaged capital unnecessarily. There is nothing conservative about forcing larger withdrawals from a traditional IRA during years when the money could have remained sheltered. There is nothing conservative about losing 8 years of tax-free growth in a Roth account. If another income source could have covered part of the need, there is nothing conservative about postponing cash flow during years when your health, mobility, and appetite for living may be at their highest. A great many people confuse delay with discipline. Delay is not automatically discipline. Delay is only wise when it improves the total outcome. That distinction is where clear thinking begins. The second mistake people make is that they turn this into a break-even contest and stop there. They say, if I claim at 62, I stay ahead until some age. If I wait until 67, I need to live to another age to catch up. If I wait until 70, perhaps I need to live to 81 or beyond to come out ahead. Those calculations are not useless, but by themselves they are incomplete. They assume that life will cooperate with the spreadsheet. Life does not cooperate with the spreadsheet. Taxes do not cooperate with the spreadsheet. Health does not cooperate with the spreadsheet. A spouse does not cooperate with the spreadsheet. Cash needs do not cooperate with the spreadsheet. Market returns do not cooperate with the spreadsheet. Energy levels do not cooperate with the spreadsheet. The sequence in which you take money from various accounts does not cooperate with the spreadsheet. In other words, the break-even table may be neat, but retirement is not neat. A person with reasons to believe they may not live deep into their 80s should look at the decision differently from a person with unusual longevity. A household with one high-benefit spouse and one low-benefit spouse should look at the decision differently from a single retiree. A household entering several low-income years may find that the tax treatment of benefits looks very different from what it will look like later. A retiree with large traditional balances approaching required distributions may have opportunities that disappear with time. Someone who wants to travel, help children, renovate a home, or enjoy the active years of retirement while they still can, should value early cash flow differently from someone whose spending will remain flat and modest. This is why simple slogans are so often dangerous. They free people from thinking just when thinking matters most. When I was younger, I learned that there is a tremendous advantage in looking at the whole chessboard when others are staring at one square. Retirement claiming is no different. Most commentary stares at one square, the size of the monthly check. I would rather look at the entire board portfolio withdrawals, tax character, survivor economics, spouse timing, spending curve, flexibility, optionality, quality of life, sequence of returns, longevity, the irreversibility of time. That is the board. Now let us move to the next part that people ignore. Your retirement accounts do not all behave the same way, and that matters enormously. A Roth IRA is a beautiful account because growth can accumulate tax-free, and under current rules, you are not forced to drain it with required minimum distributions during your own lifetime. A traditional IRA and a 401k offer tax deferral, which is useful, but they also come with eventual required distributions. The longer you preserve tax-advantaged growth when you do not need to touch it, the better the internal economics often become. If Social Security at 62 allows you to reduce withdrawals from those accounts, then Social Security is not merely a government check. It becomes a funding tool, it becomes a bridge, it becomes a piece of the structure that protects the portfolio. That is a very different way to think about the benefit. Most people have been taught to think of Social Security as something you maximize by waiting. In many real situations, it should be thought of as something you deploy to reduce damage elsewhere. I like decisions that reduce damage elsewhere. And the moment you see it that way, other opportunities begin to appear. For instance, if your taxable income is relatively low in your early retirement years, taking Social Security earlier and managing portfolio withdrawals carefully may create room for deliberate Roth conversions at lower tax brackets. It may allow you to move money from a tax-deferred account into a tax-free environment under more favorable conditions than you will have later. That can affect not only your taxes today, but the taxes you face after required minimum distributions begin. It can affect how much of your Social Security becomes taxable later. It can affect what remains for a surviving spouse. It can affect what you keep. And what you keep is always more important than what looks large before leakage. A great many investors are fascinated by return and strangely indifferent to leakage. They want to earn more and ignore what is draining away. Yet wealth is never built only by what comes in. It is built by what stays, what compounds, and what avoids unnecessary friction. Taxes are friction. Forced withdrawals are friction. Poor sequencing is friction. Unthinking delay is friction. You do not get rich by admiring friction. The same principle should guide retirement claiming. If waiting produces a larger nominal benefit but requires heavier withdrawals, greater tax exposure, reduced flexibility, and diminished use of the best years of retirement, then waiting may improve one visible number while worsening the actual economics of the household. That is not optimization, that is confusion. Now let us talk about spouses, because this is where many people make a serious mistake. Social Security is not just an individual decision in many marriages. It is a household decision. A spouse often cannot access a spousal benefit until the primary worker files. Waiting can therefore delay not only your own income, but theirs. In some households, the delay may cost tens of thousands of dollars of cumulative benefits over a period when the money would have been useful. And once those months are gone, they are gone. You do not retrieve them later. That point is worth sitting with because it reveals something important. Retirement is not only about maximizing the check of one person, it is about maximizing the usefulness of income to the household over time. Sometimes people become so enchanted by the idea of a larger benefit later that they fail to notice they are locking a spouse out of income. Now that is not intelligent maximizing, that is narrow maximizing. Narrow maximizing is one of the easiest ways to get a real-world decision wrong. Then there is the survivor question. If one spouse has a larger benefit and stronger earnings history, survivor benefits matter. There are cases where filing patterns affect how income arrives now and how it may step up later for the surviving spouse. In those cases, the right answer is not found by looking only at your own monthly amount in isolation. It is found by asking what sequence gives the household the best blend of income today, protection later, and flexibility in between. I've never been impressed by isolated metrics. A single number rarely contains the truth. The truth is usually in the interaction among several numbers. That is certainly true here. Now let us turn to taxes, because the tax dimension is more subtle than many retirees realize. People often assume a bigger Social Security benefit is automatically better because it is a bigger benefit. But the after-tax value of income matters more than the pre-tax number, depending on provisional income, other withdrawals, pensions, work income, and filing status. A large portion of Social Security can become taxable. In some circumstances, a smaller benefit received earlier during lower income years may be worth more after tax than a larger benefit received later in a period crowded with other taxable income. This surprises people because they are still thinking like employees. They are used to considering the source of income one paycheck at a time. Retirement should be treated more like capital allocation across pools of income with different tax characteristics. That is how rational people should think. The decision is not merely which check is biggest. The decision is which sequence leaves me with the best after-tax lifetime structure, the strongest portfolio durability, and the highest flexibility. That is a better question, a much better one. And once you start asking that better question, another truth becomes clear. The early years of retirement are not interchangeable with the later years. This is obvious in life and somehow forgotten in planning. Retirement usually comes in phases. There is a period when people still have health, energy, curiosity, mobility, and appetite. They can travel, they can visit grandchildren, they can take up hobbies with seriousness. They can wake up and decide to go somewhere just because it is Tuesday and they are alive. Then there's a later period when movement slows, health expenses rise, and some ambitions get traded for comfort and caution. Then there is often a final phase where the planning horizon contracts and physical limits dominate. It is a strange error to pretend that $1 arriving at 78 has the same practical value as $1 arriving at 63. It does not. $1 is not just $1 in retirement. It is also a unit of freedom attached to a moment in life. The same nominal amount can buy a very different quality of experience, depending on when it appears. I would rather have sensible resources during the years when I can still use them well than a somewhat larger stream arriving after some of the best opportunities have passed. That is not recklessness. Too much retirement advice is written as if the only thing that matters is maximizing lifetime nominal benefits. Human beings do not live in nominal columns. They live in bodies, they live in marriages, they live in homes. They live in years that can be vigorous or limited. They live in circumstances that change. They live in uncertainty. The quality of income depends on its timing. The person who refuses to recognize that is not being rigorous. He is merely being incomplete. Now let me be equally clear about something else. I am not arguing that everyone should claim at 62. I distrust one-size-fits all advice, whether it tells people to delay or to file early. There are cases where waiting can make excellent sense. A retiree with little need for near-term cash flow, unusual longevity, a desire to maximize survivor protection in a specific household setup, and a portfolio structure that benefits from delay may choose differently. Sensible people can disagree at the edges because circumstances differ. I am arguing that many people have been trained to treat delay as the default badge of prudence, when in fact it may be the wrong default for their own situation. That is the important correction. In investing and in life, default settings are dangerous when they replace thought. Most bad decisions are not caused by a lack of intelligence. They are caused by borrowed assumptions. Someone hears what sounds respectable, repeats it to himself often enough, and stops examining whether it fits the actual facts in front of him. That is how investors overpay in booms. That is how businesses drift into mediocrity. That is how retirees missequence their income. A useful mind should resist this impulse. Let us bring the whole picture together. If you have accumulated a few $100,000 in tax, advantage retirement accounts, then claiming Social Security earlier may reduce the need to raid those accounts during a critical compounding window. If you reduce withdrawals, more capital remains invested. If more capital remains invested, the portfolio has more time to grow tax-deferred or tax-free. If your income is lower in those years, you may have more favorable tax opportunities. If filing earlier unlocks spousal income or supports survivor planning, the household may be stronger. If earlier income supports the active years of retirement, its practical value may be far higher than a larger check later. And if all of those things are true at once, then waiting is not automatically safer. It may simply be slower, narrower, and more expensive. That is the case I want people to understand. They do not need to agree with me on every example. They do not need to copy any single claiming age. They do not even need to arrive at the same final choice. But they should stop pretending the decision begins and ends with the size of the age 70 check. That is not analysis. It is fixation. And fixation is the enemy of good judgment. When I evaluate any financial choice, I try to ask a simple question. What invisible trade am I making? In this situation, the invisible trade is often severe. By waiting, you may be trading current cash flow for future nominal income. You may be trading tax flexibility for a larger headline number. You may be trading reduced portfolio withdrawals for increased strain on your accounts. You may be trading household income now for a delayed theoretical advantage later. You may be trading years of physical freedom for a larger benefit during years when freedom is already shrinking. Those are not trivial trades. Once you see them clearly, the entire conversation changes. And that change is healthy because retirement should not be planned as though life were a contest to delay as long as possible. It should be planned as a system designed to protect capital, preserve flexibility, reduce unnecessary leakage, and support a life worth living. That is how I would think about it. I would not ask, how to win the Social Security game on paper. I would ask, how do I structure my income so that my own money keeps compounding, my tax picture stays reasonable, my household stays flexible, and my best years are funded while they still matter? That is a more intelligent question because it reflects reality. A great many people spend their working lives learning to save and invest, only to mishandle the distribution phase by clinging to simplistic rules. They become careful on the way up and careless on the way out. They pay enormous attention to accumulation and surprisingly little attention to withdrawal sequencing. That is unfortunate because in retirement, sequencing can matter as much as selection. The order in which income arrives can affect taxes, longevity of assets, survivor outcomes, and peace of mind. The person who understands that has an advantage. The person who ignores it does not become safer. He merely becomes more obedient to conventional language. I have never thought obedience was a substitute for thought. So if you are in your early 60s and deciding when to claim, I would encourage a different mindset. Do not worship the bigger check. Do not let averages bully you. Do not confuse later with better. Do not isolate Social Security from the rest of your balance sheet. Do not ignore your spouse. Do not ignore taxes. Do not ignore the compounding value of money left alone. Do not ignore the practical value of cash flow during your healthiest retirement years. And above all, do not hand over a deeply personal allocation decision to a slogan that sounds respectable at a dinner party. You have one retirement. You have one sequence of years. You have one set of accounts. You have one body, one household, one tolerance for uncertainty, one pattern of spending, one tax situation, and one life to arrange. That is why the right answer is never found in a generic sentence. It is found by understanding the economics of your own case. If I had to summarize the lesson in one line, it would be this. For many retirees with meaningful tax advantage savings, claiming Social Security at 62 is not a surrender of value. It can be a defense of value. It can defend your portfolio from excessive early withdrawals. It can defend the compounding power of your accounts. It can defend your tax flexibility. It can defend household cash flow. It can defend the years of retirement when money is most useful and when a financial decision protects that many things at once. I pay attention because sensible investing has never been about chasing the largest visible number. It has always been about building the strongest total outcome. That is true in business. It is true in markets. And for a great many people, it is true in retirement too.